This is Exploring Creation with Zoology Flying Creatures of the Fifth Day. Lesson 11, Social Insects. Many insects are loners. They don't spend time with other insects of the same species except to mate. They don't even take care of their young. They simply lay their eggs somewhere and leave forever. Some insects, like the praying mantis, will even eat its mate and its siblings if food is scarce. Other insects don't mind spending time with insects of the same species, but they don't help one another out or have special relationships with each other. Interestingly, there are some insects that do form close relationships and depend on one another for survival. They all work together, having different jobs that keep the colony alive. These insects are called social insects. Only two orders of insects are considered social: Hymenoptera and Isoptera. Order Hymenoptera contains bees, wasps, ants, while order Isoptera contains termites. Although there are several kinds of social insects, they tend to create colonies that operate in a similar manner. One insect is the queen, and she lays all the eggs. She is fed and taken care of by the other insects in the colony. With those in order Hymenoptera, bees, wasps, and ants, the males are called drones and only have one job: to mate with the queen. The rest of the colony is made up of females, called workers. These are the ants, bees, and wasps that you see. Termites have both a queen and a king, and they also have both male and female workers. They also have soldiers that protect the colony. Let's start our study of these interesting creatures by looking at bees, wasps, and ants. Hymenoptera. The word hymen means membrane, and the word pteron means wing. The members of order Hymenoptera then have wings that are like thin membranes. Some ants don't have wings, but they do have little humps on their backs where wings would have formed had they been fed the right food. Insects in this order usually have a wasp called a petiole, which is the thin stalk on front of the abdomen that connects to the thorax. They also have an antenna that are used for smell and touch, and they all experience complete metamorphosis. Ants are both beneficial insects and pests. They tunnel into the ground, which improves the soil, and many species also eat harmful insects. The ants that prefer to live in your home, however, are considered pests. The fire ant, which is with its terribly painful bite, is a serious pest to humans and animals in the southern United States, as well as Central and South America. Ants live in a colony that is ruled by a queen. Have you ever heard the saying, "You are what you eat"? Well, this is especially true with ants. Any female ant larva can become a queen if it is fed the proper diet. Most ant larvae are not fed that diet, however, so they do not become queens. If the larva is fed the proper diet, she will emerge from the pupa stage with wings. Larvae that are not fed the royal diet will come out of the pupa stage without wings, which means they cannot make eggs or produce young. Male ants, on the other hand, usually have wings when they emerge from the pupa stage and are ready to mate. They are called drones. Usually, the queens and drones will emerge from their pupa stage at the same time. The male and female winged ants are called atlays. In order for the male and female atlays to mate, they must swarm. How do they do that? Well, all the atlays come out of their home, their anthill, at once, flying this way and that way. They pair off together and mate so the new queen can lay eggs. After they mate, the male dies. His only job is done. He has no other reason to live. After she mates, a queen usually looks for a nice place to begin a colony. She will become the mother of every ant in her colony. Some will simply drop to the ground wherever they finished mating and begin the colony there. Most ants prefer to nest in tunnels in the ground, building mounds that are called ant hills. Other species nest in dead wood, in plants, in buildings and ships, or in papery nests attached to branches or rocks. Once the queen has found her spot, she scrapes off her wings and starts to build her ant hill. She tunnels into the earth, or whatever she prefers to tunnel into, and builds a little room where she lays her first eggs. They are the only young she will ever have to care for, because when they are adults, her children will do all the work. The queen feeds this little brood with her own saliva. After a few days, the eggs hatch into little worm-like larvae called grubs. They are white and cannot move or feed themselves. They are completely and totally dependent on adult ants to care for them. They are constantly fed and will molt and grow several times. Then each larva will form a pupa, which often looks like an ant egg but is much bigger. If you happen to open an ant hill and see the ants scurrying about carrying off what look like ant eggs, they are probably carrying the ant pupae. They are trying to save the pupae. At eclosion, when the ant emerges from the pupa, it is often transparent with a very soft body. It takes a few days for its exoskeleton to harden. The first group of eggs laid by the queen will all hatch worker ants. These are female ants that don't have wings and cannot mate. They will begin looking for food immediately. The queen will lay more eggs, and from that point on, that's all she will do. The eggs, larvae, pupae, and queen will all be cared for by the workers. The queen ant will live like that for several years. But worker ants typically live for somewhere between a few months and 5 years. When the colony begins, the queen will produce only worker ants. Each worker begins its adult life with the safest job, caring for the eggs, grubs, pupae, or the queen. As they get older, they are given the harder job of making tunnels and keeping the nest clean by taking out the trash. Finally, when they are much older, they are sent to look out for food, the most dangerous job of all. As the colony grows, the queen will lay eggs that produce male ants, drones, and the workers will create more queens by feeding the grubs with the diet necessary to produce queens. When these atlays become adults, they will swarm and start the process all over again. Worker ant jobs. Worker ants have several specific jobs. Interior workers tend to the queen and the brood eggs, larvae, and pupae. These servants move the eggs, larvae, and pupae around all over the nest, finding just the right amount of warmth and moisture for them. The larvae are licked, touched, and fed all day long. The interior workers chew insect parts or other food into a gooey mixture and feed it to the larvae. They also feed the larvae regurgitated food that they store in an organ called the crop. The workers also help the open pupae when they are ready to emerge as adults. Nest maintenance workers help build the nest. The nest might be 20 feet deep and may cover thousands of square feet. These workers make the tunnels called galleries and rooms called chambers where everything is kept. The queen's chamber is usually a large room near the center of the colony. When other chambers are used for storing food, raising larvae, or storing trash. As the colony grows, galleries and chambers are added. The nest maintenance ants move many tons. A ton is 2,000 pounds of soil to build the anthill. All this soil is moved 1 grain at a time, held in an ant's mandibles. Scouts are single ants that go out and look for food. When food is found, they leave a scented trail from the food back to the anthill and tell the foragers to follow the trail. Once a scout tells the foragers about food, they march out and follow the scent the scout left behind all the way to the food source. The scout doesn't always leave a straight trail back to the food, which is why ants often zigzag as they are heading to get food. Ants are extremely clean creatures and have designated trash men. Actually, they are trash women because worker ants are all female. These midden ants take all waste, feces, leftover food parts, and dead ants out of the anthill and heap it into a pile called the midden. Not only do ants keep their anthill clean, they spend a lot of time cleaning it themselves and each other. Although all ants defend the colony from attack or disaster, some species of ants have special fighting ants whose only job is to fight other ants. While other ants are busy keeping everything nice and clean, everyone well fed, these ants are busy watching out for the enemy. Who is the enemy? Usually, any ant from another colony is the enemy. You see, ants like to find weaker ant colonies and destroy them. Because of this, ants are always on the lookout for attacks from other ants. They are also looking for other ant colonies to attack. If a foreign ant comes too close to an ant colony, it will be attacked. When this happens, the ant will release an alarm pheromone and all the ants will come to defend the colony. Ants have several ways to defend themselves and fight other ants. They have sharp-toothed biting mandibles. Some South American ant mouse are so strong they can even slice into the skin of animals. Ants also produce formic acid in special glands. The spray of formic acid can irritate or blind other insects. They spray the acid before and after they bite. This is part of what makes an ant bite so painful. Next is ant talk. Ants don't talk, of course, but they do communicate very well. They communicate with one another by releasing pheromones, which you learned about in Lesson 9. Scientists have detected many different pheromones that ants produce, and each pheromone has its own meaning. One pheromone could mean, "There is food on the trail behind me," while another could mean, "Danger, run away." Another might say, "Danger, attack." Other pheromones let the workers know what they need to do to take care of the colony. Ants don't have good vision, so pheromones are very important to them. They also tend to recognize each other by scent. When two ants meet, they will often investigate each other with antennae to smell whether or not they are members of the same colony. An ant can also sense vibrations like tiny hair-like projections on its body, head, and legs. Do you remember what they are called? These projections are called? They are called sentae. Most ants eat other insects. Some also like to eat seeds and fruit, but almost all ants like sweet stuff. Many drink flower nectar, for example. Interestingly enough, ants can only swallow liquids. They cannot eat solids. When they eat another insect, they swallow the liquids inside the insect. They don't eat the solid parts. If they find solid food, they cut it up into small pieces and take it back to the anthill, because the larvae can eat solid food at certain times. Occasionally, you will see a lone ant searching around your house or yard. That ant is a scout. It has been sent out to find food. It looks everywhere and loves it when you drop cereal or other foods on the floor. When a scout finds a good food source, it heads back to the colony, squirting chemicals out as it goes to make a very smelly trail that the other ants can use to find the food source. When it runs into other ants, it speaks to them with its pheromones, telling them to head on down the trail. That ant tells other ants, and so on, until before you know it, there are hundreds of ants, forager ants, following the same path to the piece of cereal you dropped under the table. Foragers have the hardest job of the colony. They have to face bad weather, other ants, and predators while gathering food for the colony. Because of their dangerous job, many do not live very long. However, the forager actually does a lot of good in its short life. It can carry much more than its own weight, hauling huge quantities of food back to the colony. The ant shepherds and farmers. Would you believe that some ants actually care for and use other insect species the way humans use sheep and cattle? In the same way a shepherd cares for his sheep and milks them to drink their milk, ants shepherd aphids. Many species of ant take good care of their aphids, guarding them, moving them to better food sources, and taking them home for the night. Aphids are small insects that feed on the sap of newly sprouted stems, leaves, and flowers. Eating the sap inside these fresh plants causes a special substance called honeydew to form inside the aphid's body. Ants will milk an aphid by rubbing the aphid's back with its antennae. The honeydew squeezes out of the aphid's abdomen and the ant enjoys a nice taste. You may think that this is a lousy thing to happen to an aphid, but it's not. You see, ladybugs love to eat aphids, but they don't eat aphids that are being guarded by ants. So aphids that become sheep are actually a lot safer than aphids that are on their own. Do you have any aphid on the plants in your yard? Are they guarded by ants? In God's incredible creation, not only have some ants been designed to be shepherds, others have designed to be farmers. Leafcutter ants cut up leaves and bring them back to the colony. The leaves are then cleaned. Remember, ants are very clean. And chewed up into little bits. Those little bits of leaves are piled together and mixed with ant droppings, or feces. This mixture is perfect for a particular kind of fungus which grows on the mixture. Ants tend their fungus farm, keeping it free of anything else except the fungus, and they eat the fungus for food. Isn't that amazing? Next, we're going to look at the honeybee. Let's explore another group of insects in order Hymenoptera that are almost as commonly seen on a warm summer day as the ant. Let's learn about bees. Do you realize that there are more than 20,000 different species of bee? Most of them are solitary bees that live alone, but a few are social bees that live with thousands of others, sometimes up to 80,000 in one colony. Even though there are many different kinds of bees, I want to cover one type of bee in detail, the honeybee. It isn't native to America, but was brought here from Europe, where it provided people with honey for thousands of years. The bumblebee is native to America, and I'll give this little forager an honorable mention at the end of the lesson. Wherever you see flowers, you will usually see honeybees and bumblebees. Do you think bees are beneficial insects or pests? Sometimes they sting, so you might think they are pests. Most bees, however, are beneficial insects that keep us not only fed, but supplied with beautiful flowers. Bees are pollinators for flowers. Without bees, the world would look quite different, and we wouldn't have nearly as much food. You see, the fruits and vegetables we love to eat come from plants that produce flowers, and those flowers need pollination. If a flower doesn't get pollinated, it will not be able to make seeds. If you have not taken a course on botany, the study of plants, let me take a moment to explain how pollination works. Many plants make seeds that start out as flowers. The flowers have male and female parts. The male part produces pollen, while the female part produces eggs. In order for a seed to form, the pollen must get from the male part of the flower to the female part of another flower. So how does the pollen get from one flower to another? There are many ways, but the most common is the result of visiting insects, like bees and butterflies. A bee has a little hair-like bristle on its body, and those bristles get all covered with pollen while the bee is collecting both pollen and nectar for the hive. When the bee goes to another flower of the same kind, some of the pollen falls off and finds its way to the female part of the flower. Once that happens, seeds are formed, and a big fruit like an apple, peach, pear, cherry, or tomato grows around the seeds to protect them. Then we eat the fruit and plant the seeds. It is a wonderful thing that God has created bees so that we can continue to have beautiful flowers to enjoy, fruits to eat, and seeds to plant. Bees are feared by most people because of their ovipositors, or stingers, that are outfitted with an internal venom chamber for injecting venom into their victims. This is how bees protect the hive and themselves. The sting is a painful reminder to keep your distance. Honeybees have it a little more difficult than other stinging insects because their stingers have barbs on them. When a working honeybee stings a creature, the barb causes the stinger to get caught. As the bee yanks to get its own ovipositor out of the creature, the entire ovipositor and part of the abdomen come off. Sadly, this causes the little bee to die. Wasps, other kind of bees, and queen honeybees don't have these barbs. They can sting again and again because they simply pull out the stinger and it doesn't get stuck. Why does a honeybee have a barbed stinger if it kills the bee? Well, a honeybee sting hurts worse than a sting from most other insects, which is a powerful reminder to animals and people that they should avoid honeybees. The sting of a honeybee hurts so much because the stinger is left in the skin with the venom chamber attached. If you push on it, more venom goes into your skin. In the same way, if you try to get the stinger out with tweezers, you will inject more venom into you. To safely remove a honeybee stinger from your skin, you need to scrape the stinger from the side with a blunt object. This will pull the stinger out without squeezing the venom chamber. Royal food. Bees build hives out of a waxy substance they make themselves. Not surprisingly, this substance is called beeswax. A beehive is an elaborate, beautiful structure that contains hundreds of six-sided cells. Bees store food in most of the cells, but the queen also lays eggs in some of them. Just like a queen ant, a queen bee lays eggs that mostly produce female bees. When they hatch, the larvae are fed by nurse bees. If the bee is to be a worker, the nurse bee feed a substance called royal jelly for 3 days only. Royal jelly is a special white substance made by worker bees. It has nutritional properties that make the bee develop and grow a lot in just 3 days. After 3 days, however, the nurse bee will change the larvae's diet to pollen and honey to make sure it is a worker. The hive needs lots and lots of workers. If a larva is fed royal jelly beyond 3 days, it will develop into a queen. Since a queen bee is bigger than a worker bee, the walls of the developing larva cells must be broken down to give the developing queen more room. The queen bee. Even after the queen bee is an adult, she is given a diet of royal jelly her entire life, which is usually about 5 years. The queen bee is easy to spot because she is larger than the worker bees. Even though a hive can have only one queen, nurse bees still feed some larvae royal jelly. Those larvae do not survive, however, because the queen kills them before they mature. When the queen dies, however, there is nothing to kill the developing queen larvae, so they will continue to develop. When the first queen matures, she will kill the remaining queen larvae. This interesting process makes sure that the hive will never be without a queen for long, and that there will never be more than one queen at a time. After a new queen has killed all of the other potential queens, she goes on a vacation to mate, much like an ant queen. Unlike an ant queen, however, this queen returns to her hive to lay the eggs. Now remember, both the worker and the queens are females. What about the males? Well, male bees are called drones, and their sole purpose in life is to mate with the queen so she can lay eggs. Since they can't do anything else, they don't live very long. And before winter, they're all kicked out of the hive and not allowed to come back in. Since they don't know how to find food, they die of starvation outside of the hive. That's kind of sad, huh? Worker bees. When a worker metamorphoses into an adult, she gets to work immediately. If she is born early in the year, she will live for only about 5 or 6 weeks. If she is born in the fall, she will live through winter, but dies soon after spring arrives. Worker bees have a short but very busy, important life. Each worker bee begins with one job and graduates to the next job, much like a worker ant. Every job is just as important as the next, but they do get progressively harder as the bee moves up the job ladder. Most female worker bees begin their lives as the nurse bee, feeding the young larvae and making royal jelly for new larvae and the queen. A few are assigned the all-important job of queen's attendant, and they feed and clean the queen every day. The next job is to be the storekeeper. The storekeeper does 3 things. First, she makes sure the hive doesn't get too hot. As the hive temperature increases, she flaps her wings, which makes a little fan that cools the hive. Second, she packs the pollen brought in by the gatherer bees into the cells of the hive so it can be stored for future use. Third, she makes honey. After spending time as a storekeeper, the bee graduates to become a wax maker. This is a very hard job, much harder than feeding bees, cooling the hive, or even making honey. The wax maker is the architect and the builder of the hive, producing beeswax and forming the 6-sided cells of which the hive is made. When the wax makers are ready to add more structures to the hive, they gather into a group and hang, waiting for the wax to ooze out of them from glands in their abdomens. Then, with their back legs, they pull it out and shove it into their mouths, chewing it for a while. This makes the wax pasty that becomes the hive. Waxy paste that becomes the hive. When the paste is in its mouth, each bee is ready to spit it out little by little to create perfect six-sided, called a hexagonal, cells. After the bee has been a wax maker for a while, it will then be put to work on the entrance to hive as guard, or called a sentry bee. As sentry, it protects the hive from intruders, including the drones that were kicked out of the hive. If anything that shouldn't be in the hive tries to get in, the sentry uses its venomous stinger on the intruder. This kills the sentry, but it also keeps the intruder away. If a beehive has a rough time, like really bad weather, a severe lack of flowers, or a catastrophe such as a visiting bear, the queen bee will send out robber bees. Robber bees find and take honey from weaker hives so that their hive can continue to survive. The last job that a worker bee has is usually that of a scout or a gatherer bee. Scouts go out each day searching for just the right flower. You see, most honeybees don't visit the closest flowers. Instead, bees in a particular hive usually look for a specific kind of flower from which they gather nectar or pollen. The scout's job is to find that specific kind of flower. The gatherer bees are the ones that you usually see. They go to the flowers that the scouts have found, and they gather pollen and nectar to bring back to the hive. Dancing bees. When the right flowers are discovered by a scout, she rushes back to the hive to spread the news. Moments later, gatherer bees charge out of the hive and fly directly to the flowers. The astonishing thing about this is that the gatherer bees don't follow the scouts back to the flower. They simply fly directly to them. How do they know where the flowers are? Scientists have discovered that scouts tell the gatherers where the flowers are by dancing. The dance is done in the hive so that all the gatherers can see it. If the flowers are within 50 yards or so of the hive, the scouts dance the circular dance. If the flowers are farther away, the scouts dance the waggle dance, which is more like a figure-8 dance. First, the bee starts out as if it's dancing in a circle. Then it waggles up the center and then completes the circle. The waggle part of the dance tells the gatherers what direction to fly, and the speed at which it travels in the circles tells the gatherers how far away the flowers are. Flower power. So why do gatherer bees visit flowers? Well, flowers provide the food that the members of the hive eat. The gatherer bees collect both pollen and nectar from the flower. Their back legs are covered with hair-like bristles and shaped like little spoons with little bags attached. The bees load these bags up with pollen. Back at the hive, the bees use the collected pollen to make bee bread, which is a mixture of honey and pollen. This is the main food for the members of the hive, in addition to drinking some nectar for energy to make it through the day. The gatherer bees store nectar in special sacs that are inside the bee's body. Nectar is used to make honey, which I will discuss in a moment. Have you ever heard of a bee collecting propolis? Most people don't know that gatherer bees collect this substance as well. It's a thick, sticky fluid that bees gather from the buds of trees. Back at the hive, it is used like glue to fill in the cracks in the hive. This makes the hive stronger and also keeps out the wind, which makes the hive warmer for the winter. Making honey. When the gatherers return to the hive, they vomit up the nectar into the mouths of other bees, and those bees mix up the nectar with their saliva. This saliva contains chemicals that begin to convert the nectar into honey. Then the nectar-saliva mixture is placed in a cell to dry. Bees stand over the cells and fan their wings to evaporate water from the nectar. As the nectar loses water, it becomes thicker and more solid until it is honey. Finally, the cells are capped and sealed with beeswax until honey is needed. Because honey is stored in the cells that make up a hive, a collection of hive cells is often called a honeycomb. The bees use the honey to mix with pollen and make bee bread, which feeds the hive. Of course, we like to use the honey for ourselves. Do you enjoy eating honey? All our honey comes from bees. For thousands of years, people have enjoyed eating this wonderful product made by busy bees. Today, beekeepers can be found in every state. One may even live near you. Beekeepers have boxes where they keep their colonies of bees. Have you ever wondered how beekeepers are able to collect the honey without getting stung by bees? It was a long time ago it was discovered that bees become very calm and unlikely to give off the alarm pheromone if they're first exposed to smoke from a fire. This is because they think they have to leave the hive, so they start eating all they can in preparation for leaving. Because of this, beekeepers spray smoke on the hive before they open up the box to collect the honey. Usually a beekeeper will wear protective clothing anyway, just in case. Honey isn't the only product we take from bees. We also take the hive and use the wax from which it is made. Some important uses for beeswax are cosmetics, or makeup for women, candles, lotions, ointments, coating for pills, floors, furniture polishes, crayons, and ski wax. Some people even eat the honeycomb, but now that you know how it's made, you might have a hard time doing that. Next, we're going to look at bumblebees. Bumblebees are quite different from honeybees. They not only look different, but they also act different. The main difference you notice with bumblebees is they are much larger than honeybees. They are chubby, furry little creatures. They don't seem to sting as much as a honeybee stings. When they do sting, however, they don't kill themselves stinging you, as honeybees do. This is because they don't have barbed stingers, so they can remove their stinger after they have stung and fly away. When a new queen bumblebee is born and becomes an adult, she looks for a drone, a male bumblebee, for a mate. After the mating, the male dies. She then finds a place to hibernate, which is usually the soil, and sleeps through the winter. Once spring comes, she stops her hibernation and looks for an empty hole in the ground. This is where she will start her colony. In there, she'll build a wax pot, and she will forage for nectar to make honey, which she will put in the pot. She also collects pollen and makes it into a ball, and she lays her eggs on that pollen ball. She keeps the eggs warm and does not leave them, using the honey in the honey pot for food. The first set of eggs produce worker bees, which build the nest for the cells for the nest, take care of the nest, and forage for nectar to make more honey. At this point, the queen does nothing but eat and lay eggs. Bumblebees are not as loyal to the queen as honeybees are, and they don't have nearly as organized a get to the flowers. The workers just go out looking for them. Nevertheless, the process of collecting nectar, they do pollinate flowers, just as honeybees do. When the nest has made enough honey, the queen starts laying eggs that will make drones. Interestingly enough, some of the workers are also able to lay eggs that become drones. Once the drones have developed into adults, they may stay in the nest a few days, but they generally leave pretty quickly and do not come back. Unlike honeybee drones, bumblebee drones know how to find flowers and eat nectar from them. In late summer, some eggs hatch into new queen bees, and once they have become adults, they leave the nest to mate. Then, like the previous queen, they will hibernate over the winter to start a nest next spring. The workers and the drones die off, leaving only the queen to survive the winter. Next is badly behaved bees. Have you ever thought about being a scientist? Have you ever imagined doing experiments and discovering new things? That's the fun of being a scientist. You get to experiment. Well, sometimes experiments turn out bad. That's what happened about 50 years ago to a group of scientists that studied bees. These scientists brought African bees and European bees to Brazil in South America to see if they could mate them. They wanted to do this so they could develop a bee that would produce more honey in warmer climates. Scientists called these new bees Africanized Honeybees. This new breed of bees, however, wouldn't stay in a beekeeper's box. Unlike regular honeybees, they would suddenly leave the colony and build a hive somewhere else. Scientists later discovered that the queen would decide to leave after a few months, only taking half the colony with her. Africanized honeybees are much more protective of their beehive and more likely to sting. When one releases an alarm pheromone, they all attack together and sting the same animal or person with hundreds of stings. They tend to chase their target much farther than regular honeybees, and they stay angry and ready to attack much longer than a honeybee. As a result, some people call them killer bees. This was definitely an experiment that went badly, don't you think? I hope none of your experiments turn out like this one. Because of the queen's strange behavior of leaving the hive and starting new colonies, Africanized honeybees have been spreading out from Brazil. They moved northward, so they have spread through most of South America, Mexico, and the southern parts of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Scientists are not sure how far north these bees will spread. Some suggest they cannot survive well in cold temperatures, but others disagree. Even though some people call them killer bees, Africanized honeybees are not incredibly dangerous. The sting from one Africanized honeybee is no different from the sting of a regular honeybee. The one thing that makes them dangerous, they tend to sting in much greater numbers. However, if you leave them alone, they will generally leave you alone. Next is wasps. Now we are going to talk about another member of order, Hymenoptera, the wasp. It's pretty easy to tell the difference between bees and wasps, because bees look hairy and wasps generally don't. Wasps also have a longer petiole, or wasp waist. Often the petiole that separates the thorax from the abdomen is very long and thin. Some wasps also have an extensively long ovipositor that looks like a long needle. Many wasps are social insects, like bees and ants, but there are very few solitary, unsocial wasps. Social wasps include paper wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets. All three make paper nests. Wasps have been known to turn trees into paper for thousands of years, much longer than we have known how to do it. They create cells similar to the combs that bees make with wax, but they make them with paper. They chew up the bits of wood and convert it into a paste which they use to construct their paper nests. Then the queen lays an egg in each cell. When it hatches, the grub is fed regurgitated insects by the worker wasps. Many adult wasps will eat pollen and nectar, but they also eat other insects. Unlike honeybees, but just like bumblebees, the only one in a social wasp colony that will survive the winter is the queen. She will find a place to hibernate, in the hollows of trees, under barks, or in the walls of buildings. In the spring, she crawls out and starts all over again, building a few cells, laying a few eggs, and nurturing them until they can become workers who will do the work while she lays more eggs. Solitary wasps do not live in colonies. They live alone. The mud dauber is probably the most common solitary wasp. It's easy to recognize because it has a really long petiole. The female gathers mud in her mouth and uses it to build a nest for her young. The female she uses her long ovipositor to sting and paralyze tiny spiders, caterpillars, crickets, and other creatures, which are then stuffed inside the mud nest. After each cell in the nest is well stocked with spiders and insects, the mud dauber lays an egg in each cell, seals it up, and leaves. Then, when the eggs hatch, the larvae have a perfectly nice feast upon which they will dine until they become adults. Some solitary wasps make galls, which are abnormal growths on plants. They look like tumors or strange-looking balls. They form when a wasp lays its egg in the plant, and the plant develops a growth around the egg, encasing it. This actually protects the egg as it develops. Galls can be found everywhere in the late summer, especially on branches of oak trees. Other solitary wasps are even parasitic, laying their eggs inside the eggs or larvae of caterpillars. When the eggs hatch, the wasp larvae begin eating the flesh of the larvae in which they hatched. They eat their way into the inside of the larvae and feast until they pupate. The pupa is formed right inside the dying larvae, and the wasps turn into adults inside this creature. Farmers buy these parasitic wasps for insect control in their fields. Some wasps deposit their eggs in wood so that the young wasp larvae will feed on the tree itself, making circular tunnels through the wood as it feeds, until it pupates and crawls out of the tree as an adult wasp. Termites. The other order of social insects, Hymenoptera, contains termites. which spend most of their lives underground feeding on dead wood. Most people think termites are pets. When they enter your home and eat up all the walls and floor, would you disagree? However, termites are highly beneficial to creation. You see, without termites, the forest would not thrive. When a termite chews up a branch that has fallen to the ground, not only is it helping clean up the ground, it also releases important nutrients back into the soil, which nourishes the trees and other plants growing there. There is one big difference between the social life of termites and that of wasps, bees, and ants: the role of males. In a termite colony, the king and queen work together and stay with the colony throughout their lives. In addition to the king and queen, a termite colony has workers and soldiers, which can be male or female. The workers dig tunnels and find food for the colony. The soldiers defend the nest. Soldiers and workers are easy to tell apart because the soldier has a large head with large mandibles. A termite colony starts with winged termites, atlas, swarm in order to mate. After mating, they fall to the ground and scrape off their wings. The female will look for a good place to start the colony, and the male will follow her. Most termites nest underground their entire lives, but termites in Africa and Australia actually build huge mound structures that look like miniature mountains, or strange castles that can be more than 20 feet tall. The queen termite, like the queen bee, lays all the eggs for her colony. Once the eggs hatch, the immature termites are called nymphs, because termites experience incomplete metamorphosis. The queen and king take care of the first brood of nymphs, but once some of the nymphs mature into workers, the king and queen are completely cared for by the workers. The workers also find food for the colony. Termites' main food, of course, is wood. They must chew up the wood and digest it. However, there is one big problem. Termites can't digest one of the main components of wood, called cellulose. Well then, how does a termite chew up the wood and digest it? God gave termites the instinct to know they must swallow tiny little creatures called flagellates that can digest cellulose. These creatures live in the guts of termites and digest the cellulose for them. It's a good thing God gave termites this instinct, or they would starve to death. So, a newly hatched termite has to go about finding a flagellate to eat. Where are they located? They are easily found in the feces of other termites. The termite nymph first food, then, is feces. When the nymph's stomach is properly filled with flagellates, it can then eat wood. Every time the nymph molts, it must refill its stomach with flagellates. Creation confirmation. Termites are another example that the creatures on this earth were created by a magnificent God. Termites cannot survive without their wood diet, and they cannot digest the wood without the flagellates. The fact that the termites and the flagellates work together to help each other survive indicates that they are created for one another. Just as the wheels and the engine work together to make your car move because they were created to work together, termites and flagellates work together to survive because they were created by God to work together. Ants versus termites. Some people have difficulties telling ants and termites apart. However, as long as you know what to look for, it is relatively easy. Often, termite workers and soldiers are light-colored or white. This makes it easy to tell them from ants, which are usually red, brown, or black. Even if the termites are not white, however, you can still tell them apart from ants. Ants have a petiole that connects their thorax to their abdomen, while termites do not. Thus, if you see a wasp waist between the thorax and the abdomen, it is an ant. Ant antennae are usually bent, while termite antennae are straight and beaded like a string of pearls. Termites also have softer bodies than ants. The termite atlas can be a bit more difficult to identify because they look a little like winged ants, ant atlas. However, if you look at the drawing up to the right, you will see that the two pairs of wings of an ant are of different length, while the two pairs of wings on termite are of the same length. Of course, you can look at the antenna and the petiole because those differences are noticeable in atlas. And that is the end of Lesson 11. Be sure to do your activities and to do the review questions as well.